being a woman, I never saw that side of any of that. I never did. I never actually met Ron outside. I met Reg outside, and he was very, very charming. And when I was in prison, he wrote to me. He used to phone me in prison, especially when I was in Durham wing. And he would, in fact, he said to me, "You may even be in my cell."
It's quite extraordinary for me to meet someone like you, because you led this life before you went to prison, robbing banks.
Yes, unfortunately.
You were married to gangsters.
Michael Calvey, yeah.
You rubbed shoulders with the Cray twins.
Yes.
I mean, tell us a bit what that was like, because we have a habit in this country of saying, oh, everything's so much worse than it is today, forgetting that actually there were violent criminals 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yes, there was.
What was it? I mean, what was it like to rob a bank?
It was, I mean, I now, at the age I am now...
72?
75.
No.
Yes. Oh. I look back and think, was that really me? And I think what happened was my husband got shot dead on a robbery. And it affected me so much that I think my mind just flipped and I became a different person. And I started doing what he did with his gang. And did it for...
What, having previously not, as it were, participated?
No,
I
I'd never
see.
participated when my husband was alive.
I see, okay.
It was after he died.
Right, and then what happened?
Then I sort of took up the reins, and suddenly, instead of being a bank robber's wife, I became a bank robber. And I look back now, and I still think, who was that person? Because it's so alien to me as a person. I was brought up in a very honest family. My father was a blacksmith. My mother was a market trader. All my brothers and sisters, we all grew up. We went to work. They all worked, law-abiding citizens. And it was not, although in the East End it was rife with crime, my actual family were not involved in any crime. I mean, I left school, I started work, I worked in the co-op offices, and I had a normal life. And it wasn't until I met my then to end up being husband, Michael Calvey, who was a bank robber. And my family were like, oh, my God, what are you doing? But he was a very charismatic man, and I fell in love with him. And I was 19. And when you're 19, you don't care about anything else.
And this is the 1960s?
Yes, yeah.
And these are frightening people to be around, though, aren't they? I mean, the Cray twins do not look like...
No, I mean, but the thing is, I suppose, which is true, being a woman, I never saw that side of any of that. I never did. I never actually met Ron outside. I met Reg outside, and he was very, very charming. And when I was in prison, he wrote to me. He used to phone me in prison, especially when I was in Durham wing. And he would, in fact, he said to me, "You may even be in my cell," because he himself had been in Durham on that wing. And Reg actually proposed to me twice.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Why did you say no?
Well, I think I'd still be there now if I'd have become Mrs. Cray.
Tell us about, you served for 18 years in prison.
Yes.
You went to 14 different
yes.
prisons. And so we really should, because you've written so many books, but we're going to talk about the one that's out today.
Today, yes.
Tell us what you say in this book about life in prison, how you get through it, because you became a sort of mother figure in prison. But how do you survive prison?
Well, prison isn't a nice place by any stretch of the imagination, and it's not meant to be a nice place. So, obviously, when you go there, you're there, you've done something wrong, which in the case of my first prison sentence, I did. And I said, look, I did it, I accept the time. I've done the crime, I accept the time. But it isn't a nice place. I think the only thing that probably helped me from the off, I think as in with the men's prisons, there's a hierarchy. And the top of the tree are the armed robbers, and then it sort of goes down to whatever, different leagues, but it's always looked on, oh, the armed robbers are the top of the tree, which get respect from all the other inmates. And when I went into prison, I was the only armed robber that was in Holloway. And they said, oh, you'll be all right here because all the girls are in awe of you, that you're an armed robber. And I think because of that, I was looked on with respect and I was treated well. But I saw a lot of bullying, mainly inmates to inmates, but there is staff that do bully inmates. There's staff that are fabulous and will bend over backwards to help inmates. And the majority are there, it's their job. So they come, they do what they have to do, and they go home. You do get the few that are bullies, but it's more the inmates bullying other inmates. And I've sort of put that in the book to explain. And another thing that shocked me when I went to prison, I'd come from a very good family, and I presumed that everybody in prison had a mum and a dad and a normal life. And it was really shocking that actually isn't the truth. A hell of a lot, when you hear their stories, were victims that have come from single parents, drug-related, boyfriends that have put them on the game or whatever. It's quite horrendous when you listen to some of the stories. And I've put these stories in the book. I've also put funny stories. It wasn't, I'm not going to say, oh, every day was terrible. You make, I think it's gallows humour. You make the best of your situation. And you do try and do things to sort of make it a little bit lighter for yourself. But all in all, it's not a nice place. But I finished the book by saying there is life beyond prison. And hopefully, if anybody gets a bit of, to read that and go, well, she did all those years and she went out and now she's a successful author. Well, I would like to think that it will give somebody else that little push to go, well, we can do that. I could do that.
It's amazing what you're talking about. I mean, what you're talking about in the sense is true of all prisons. And for people like me, kind of middle-class wet liberals, we think, does prison do its job? Does it take someone... I think Linda Calvey is an exception, but does it take someone like the people you met who've had a terrible upbringing, not ever given a chance in life, and give them the chance, not just carrying out society's job of punishing them, but giving them a chance to rehabilitate, to get back on their feet? Prisons don't really have time to do that, do they? No,
they don't, unfortunately. I mean, I'd like to think that nowadays there is a bit more in that to sort of look on rehabilitation. I think another thing as well, when you go home, whether you've done, I think, 2 weeks or 2 years or 20 years, you leave, you get, I think, I don't know how much it is now, but I think when I left, they give you £45.
Yeah, and no support system.
And that's it. I had a home to go to. A lot of these youngsters, especially, they get put outside the door. They haven't even got anybody to collect them.
Yeah, exactly.
And you think, well, no wonder they're back.
Yeah. Can I just, I mean, it's slightly ghoulish of me, but obviously you came across some pretty notorious people while you were in these women prisons. You came across Myra Hindley. There's a story that you slapped Myra Hindley. The
first time I saw her, I didn't expect to see her. I'd just been moved to Cookenwood Prison, and they said to me, oh, you've come with such a good report, we're giving you the librarian job. So I said, oh, OK. So that next morning, they opened me up and said, take your laundry with you. The laundry's next door to the library. So fine, took my little bag of laundry and went into the library. I was told, oh, this is your desk, this is what you do. And a few girls came in and out. She never actually came in on that day. And just before the end of day, one of the screws come in and said, oh, Linda, you can take your laundry in now before the factory opens and there'll be a rush. So I said, OK, thank you. So I've got my little bag and I've gone next door and I could hear singing. And there was a door and there was, that, the stripy tape, do not cross, you'll be put on report. So I saw that and I could hear singing, and I stepped in to go, this is my laundry, and it was her, and she was bending over taking washing out.
And you instantly recognised her?
Yes. And without thinking, I just walked up and went slap, and she had a handprint on her face, and I looked and thought, oh, bloody hell, that's me back to Holloway tomorrow. And I just dropped my bag down and walked out. So that night I thought, I'm going to get put on report. There was nothing come under my door. So I was, what's going to happen? The next day, I went back into the library and I thought, well, she obviously hasn't reported it. And at 11 o'clock, when it was coffee break time, Screw come in and said, Myra has her coffee in here. Have you got a problem with that?
But was she allowed to mix with other prisoners?
Yes, in Cookham she was.
And people must have
But later,
wanted to...
further on, I believe she'd had her nose broken. She had been attacked a few times. And I said, well, if this is where she has her coffee break, I can't do anything about it. And she came in with a newspaper and she went and sat over on a table and sort of got a flask and poured her coffee out and sort of looked at me and I looked at her. And it was about 3 days later, she walked in and went, OK. And I went, yeah, OK. And that was the very first thing. And it was as if it never happened.
And did you ever speak to her again after that?
Yes, because she came in every day then.
Must have been surreal.
It was. Really surreal.
How extraordinary.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was interested in, because you were moved to a men's prison.
Yes.
In Durham, but
Yes.
it was they created a women's wing because they said that it was very difficult to house some particular categories of women prisoners, like female IRA bombers, which hadn't occurred to me.
Yes, the 2 IRA bomber girls from the Brighton bombing, they were there.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with what they did, but as people, I actually liked them. And in a way, I could understand. I think if we'd been taken over, would I be brave enough to think I'd make a stand to get our country back? So I could sort of see both sides of it, although I would never agree with bombing and whatever. But they were actually, I liked them. And they were there. There were child murderers there that couldn't be put in the normal population. There was women paedophiles, which I must have been really naive because I never knew there was such a thing as female paedophiles until I went to Durham.
Amazing. Linda,
And the first one I met was doing 18 years, so I dread to think what she'd done to get 18 years because...
There's so much more I could ask you about, Linda, but you've had an absolutely fascinating life and now you've transformed into a best-selling author.
Yes.
Your book, Life Inside, The Hard Reality of Prison and What It Takes to Survive, is out today. Linda Calvey, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.